Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at HK's Gray Room in Ashburn, Virginia, taking a look at a couple of their developmental prototype submachine guns, because who doesn't love developmental prototypes? These are designated the SMG, very descriptive, and the improved SMG II, also very descriptive. And these were both manufactured, developed really, in response to a US Navy request for a new submachine gun. The Navy was looking for something that would be better than, well, better than the MP5. And they had a bunch of requirements, but they're kind of all the standard requirements you would expect. It has to, be reliable and be durable and shoot well and not weigh too much and be cheap. In particular, they wanted it to be effective for use with a suppressor. That seems to have been one of their primary requirements. Like, they were planning to run these guns suppressed a lot. So they wanted a gun that was really conducive to a suppressor. And that definitely influenced HK's design, as you'll see in just a minute. Now, HK developed these guns between 1982 and 1985. In fact, if we look here on the back, the original, the first model, SMG, is a 1983 production gun. The second pattern one is a 1985 production gun. In the middle of 85, they were finished, and they submitted 6 individual guns to the Navy for testing. The Navy kind of took their time, spent about 18 months, and in January of 87, the Navy had finished their testing. 6 months later, they got around to giving HK the testing report, and the Navy response to these was basically, okay. And they didn't order any, because as very often happens in military testing of this sort of thing, they were hoping to find something that would be a huge step forward, and they didn't. These guns worked fine, but they weren't enough of a substantial improvement on the MP5 to justify scrapping what the Navy already had in stock and replacing it. However, for HK, this wouldn't all go to waste, but we'll talk about that in a moment. First, let's take a look at what HK was actually doing with this attempt to improve on the MP5. All right, let's start with the first pattern here, the SMG. This doesn't actually follow very many of the form factors of the MP5, which is a little bit surprising. We do see basically the exact same pistol grip and selector switch, but that's kind of where this ends. So there are 2 giant buttons on here, and they are ambidextrous, and the bottom one with the square checkering is your magazine release. This uses a new proprietary magazine. The lockup is a little bit different because it's not using a paddle, but it is still a 30-round 9mm magazine, obviously based on the MP5 mag, but not interchangeable with it. Then the top button is actually the bolt hold open, which for some reason doesn't work on this gun, but let's consider that this is in fact a developmental prototype. So parts may have been swapped out a bit on this gun, resulting in the feature not working. This button does work on the other one, so I can show you that there. Where the MP5 had its charging handle on the side of the action, as did all of the HK roller-locked or roller-delayed guns, the experimental SMG has a top-mounted charging handle. Kind of like a Thompson, with a nice cut in the middle so that you can see your sights over the top of it. This is a non-reciprocating charging handle, so when you're shooting it, it's not moving around. The stock is similar to the MP5, sort of, but the butt plate is a bit different. There's a release button on top, and when we push that, we can then slide this guy out. It will lock in place back here. It's functional, it's utilitarian, it's nothing particularly special. This sort of stock would show up later on the HK MP7, for what that's worth. So the sights on this are really kind of something else. We've got a hooded front post here, which is pretty typical. Not even going to bother letting that come into focus. Then on the back, we have this really large contraption. It does have an aperture rear sight, and then it's got a giant windage adjustment knob, which is unusual on a 9mm submachine gun. And it's also got a really big range adjustment knob. And this thing goes from 25 meters out to 150 in 25-meter increments. So, like, really precise, almost weirdly precise sights. And you can flip this in and out. You'll notice here, as it says, supersonic, or subsonic is on the outside like this, and supersonic is on the inside. when you adjust the sight here, what you're actually doing is steps on the spindle of this sight are pushing on that square tab, which raise the rear sight. It's under spring pressure pushing down. So as you rotate this, it gets lifted up incrementally more and more for the appropriate range. Well, when you push it in, now it's actually sitting on a separate set of adjustment steps. So your range adjustment is different for the inside and the outside, which allows you to have two different sight settings for two different types of ammunition. Presumably you would be running 115 grain ammunition for supersonic and 147 or 158 for subsonic. So this is part of the response to the Navy's interest specifically in using these suppressed, having two different sight settings for them. If we look at the muzzle, you can see that the opening here is hollow and there's threading on the barrel all the way back here. I don't have any of the suppressors to show you, but I can confidently say that the suppressor telescopes over the barrel and threads on there for attachment. Before we move on, we'll go ahead and show you the markings there. This is SMG, and it's serial number 6, manufactured in November of 1983. Disassembly of this guy is very standard HK. We've got 3 push pins here. Push all of those out. With those pins out, we can pull off all of the parts. So there's our stock with a nice spring buffer to cushion the end of the bolt's travel. Fire control group, hammer fired, so fires from a closed bolt, which is nice. Got our recoil spring and our bolt here. Oh, I forgot to mention, there are catches here because this has a forward assist built into the receiver. You got a little tooth that comes out of there, and that's just going to push forward on these ratchet notches. And then we can pull off the front handguard as well. So the body here is metal. Obviously the bolt and the barrel are metal. These guys, the front and rear handguards, are plastic. Now let's move on to SMG II, the improved version. This is overall lighter. It adds this interesting control lever. The magazines are not compatible. They're not the same. This now uses a plastic magazine, which is definitely lighter. Still 30 rounds, still not interchangeable with the MP5, but obviously geometrically based on it. Both of these are double stack, double feed magazines. So we still have the 2 buttons. The bottom one is, of course, for the magazine release. The top one is the bolt release. So you can't use this to manually lock the bolt open, but once you have locked it open on an empty magazine, because this did do that, you can then release the bolt with that button. Both of those, as on the SMG I, are ambidextrous, as is the selector switch. You'll notice this one has a 4-position selector, so this has a 3-round burst option built into it. HK was real big on the modularity and the options you could have in fire control groups with 2-round burst, 3-round burst, full auto, and kind of any combination thereof. The stock is basically the same. The parts aren't quite compatible, but they've left the design the same. One interesting thing they did is put a little flat spring right at the back here. So when you close the stock, you have to give it a little bit of a push to lock it in place. And when you hit the button, it actually pops out a little bit, which makes it nice and easy to grasp and extend. That huge, goofy, double drum gigantic sight is gone, having been replaced with a standard HK pattern drum sight. However, you'll notice that the apertures on this are a lot bigger. Well, that one is. They've replaced the 100-meter notch with a really big ghost ring aperture, and I think that is the sight that I would probably always want to use. Both of these also, by the way, have Stanag pattern NATO scope attachment points. Bolt handle is the same here. Forward assist is the same. And the one new thing that we have is this switch, which this is really cool. This allows you to change the muzzle velocity of your cartridges between high velocity and low velocity. So how does it do that? Because that kind of seems like, how would you do that? Well, let's pull this apart and I'll show you. Disassembly is exactly the same. We've got our 3 push pins, 2 on the stock, 1 on the magwell. Let's go ahead and pull these out. On the SMG II, these are all captive pins, which is nice. Pull that. We still have our spring-loaded buffer there. We still have our polymer-framed fire control housing. This one's a little more complicated because it has that 2-round burst feature in it. The bolt has been lightened a bit. So here's the SMG II bolt. Here is the SMG I bolt. Mechanically identical. They're basically just big, chunky, squarish bolts. You'll notice the original SMG doesn't have its firing pin in it. That's just a gray room storage thing. This one does, which is nice. But they have dramatically shortened the front stem, lightened it. I suspect this means that the SMG II is going to run a little bit faster. The data I have says the SMG II runs at about 1,000 rounds a minute, which is really quite remarkably fast. I don't have any data for the SMG I. All right, and now the cool part. We'll pull this guy off. Maybe. There we go. And what do we have under there but what appears to be a little CO2 pressure canister. So the way this works is that there is actually a series of holes on the bottom of the barrel just in front of the chamber. And when you have this set in this position, which is low, those holes vent down into this pressurized container. So when you fire, in addition to gas pressure pushing the bullet down the barrel, it's also filling up this big empty chamber. That reduces your chamber pressure, which reduces your muzzle velocity. When you flip that lever up, now in the high velocity position, now those vent holes are shut off, and so you have the full powder charge pushing the bullet, and you get a higher muzzle velocity. According to the data I have, this will take a 350 meter per second muzzle velocity and reduce it to 305 meters per second, which is coincidentally and conveniently just below the speed of sound. Of course, this is because there is a substantial difference in effectiveness of a suppressor with subsonic versus supersonic cartridges. Even with supersonic cartridges, you can reduce most of the report at the muzzle, but people will still hear a supersonic crack, and that can actually even be a bit unpleasant to the ear for the shooter. So if you want a gun that's really quite silent, you have to use subsonic ammunition, or come up with a clever device like this to reduce your muzzle velocity. All right, we can actually see those holes right there on the bottom of the rifling, just in front of the chamber. So you can't see them opened or closed because there's a little valve underneath that does that, but those are the gas vent holes that reduce your velocity. And just for completeness sake, here are the markings on SMG II. Of course, SMG II. This one's serial number 81. So while they only submitted 6 of these to the US Navy for testing, they did make quite a few more than that to get the whole design figured out. And this one is a September 1985 production. So I mentioned that the developmental time and effort and work that went into the SMG and the SMG II wasn't ultimately wasted, even though the Navy didn't buy any of the guns, and nor did anyone else, because most of the work that went into this would end up being used in the UMP project, creating that guy back there on the wall, which would be ultimately HK's commercial option to try and improve on the MP5. So it's really cool to get a chance to take a look at 2 of the developmental stepping stones between really the MP5 and the UMP, and especially that cool velocity reduction switch. That's kind of a unique thing. So a big thanks to HK for letting me in here to play with their prototype developmental submachine guns and bring them to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.